Hello friends, I'm Pastor Kathleen. Welcome to today's Bible reading. I am so glad that you are taking time to enter into this practice. I believe that spending time in God's Word is encouraging, it can be challenging, and most of all, it's transforming. We might not recognize it in the moment, but over time, God's Word, time spent with God, transforms us. We're continuing our series. We're in the second part of the book of Mark, and this week we are looking at God's glory and what it means to experience God's glory, God's presence. And I don't know about you, but for me, this is a really big concept. It's hard to fully grasp and understand. It's mysterious. When I think of God's glory, I tend to think of the big and the mighty, the magnificent, the spectacular, which I believe it is. I also believe it's some other things. And hopefully as we talk a little bit about our passage, we'll see some of those things. We're going to be in Psalm 96, which is a psalm that really speaks about God's glory. And it's interesting to me that this psalm is also in full given in 1 Chronicles 16. And so that is the context. It was offered by the priests, the Levites, under the reign of David as praise to God when the Ark of the Covenant when it was returned to Jerusalem. David attempted this once and it didn't go so well, and he attempted it this second time and it went very well. And so he asked the Levites, the priests, to offer praise to God, and so Psalm 96 is what they brought. Now, as I said, David had the Ark of the Covenant brought back, and now the Ark of the Covenant was this sacred symbol of God's presence for the people of Israel. It goes back to the book of Exodus under Moses. This is when the instructions were given of how to build this special box. And it was one of the items that was in the tabernacle, which was that moving, mobile temple that went with the Israelites as they wandered throughout the desert, heading toward the promised land. So the ark was, again, a special box made of special wood, and the cover was gold. And in it were three items: the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod or staff, and a pot, kind of a jar of manna. All three of those really speak to God's power, God's provision, and God's presence for the Israelites. So the ark was symbolic as it reminded the Israelites of God's presence and how God's presence had practically been displayed to them in their journey. So again, that's the background. As I read Psalm 96, as I think of us today, I encourage you to think about what word or phrase speaks to you of God's glory and how it might challenge you or encourage you. So listen to Psalm 96. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him, strength and glory are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, all you families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established, it cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad. Let the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Let all the trees of the forest sing for joy. Let all creation rejoice before the Lord, for he comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the people in his faithfulness. Wow, there are so many pictures and words that describe God's glory, God's power. I wonder what stood out to you. God's marvelous deeds, bringing a new song, God's splendor, God's strength, the way that the sea displays God's glory, the trees of the forest. The word joy was repeated several times. I just think of that exuberance and joy as I read that psalm. And thinking about that, I wonder, how does God's glory and the various ways it's described here, how does that speak to you when you think about the concerns, the burdens, the worries that you have, that you're carrying today? How does God's glory speak into you? I know for me, I often think of God's glory in the spectacular and the big ways, kind of in the extraordinary. I'm reminded as I reflect on this psalm, as I reflect on creation, even again being outside, of how God's glory is also revealed and displayed in the ordinary. The leaves, the intricacies of flowers, the beauty, even looking at the mountains and the magnificence. I think I often miss a sense of God's glory, maybe even a sense of God's presence, because I'm moving fast and I'm not taking time to pause and to notice. Colossians 1:27, the Apostle Paul talks about his ministry of offering good news about God's love to people. And he says that Christ in you is the hope of glory. Christ in me, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the hope of glory. And I was thinking, well, wow. So in a sense, we each have the potential to display God's glory. So as I go about my day, as you go about your day, as we think of the people that we live with or the people that we will interact with during a day, how does that speak of God's glory? So I love what author, retreat director, Flora Schlosser-Wellner says, and she says this: the glory of God is the fully alive human being, cleansed of sin and healed of wounds. Wow. The glory of God, I'm going to read it again, is the fully alive human being, cleansed of sin and healed of wounds. So that transforming presence of God, that shows and demonstrates God's glory. That is a great invitation. So as I pause and reflect, as you do, seeing God's glory in the extraordinary, in the ordinary, and especially Christ in you, the hope of glory, the potential we have for seeing it in ourselves and in other people. That is encouraging. I hope that you will spend time today reflecting on the glory of God, the presence of God, that transforming presence that offers hope and help and healing. If for any reason you don't get these devotionals sent to your email, you can opt in at findcommunity.com/Bible reading.